Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis at the new parak, Parak Gimel. The third parak discusses predominantly the laws related to bishul, cooking on Shabbos, which is one of the Lamed Tes Malachos in Isser D'Araisa. However, our Mishnah begins with the preparations going into Shabbos related to bishul, and that is the Isser D'Rabban of Shehiyah. D'Araisa Minatorah, there's no problem to put a pot on a stove before Shabbos. But the Chachamim were concerned that if a person does do that, then he'll want to then quicken his food, his pot, to be cooked, whereby on Shabbos he may stoke and stir the coals, being over an Isser D'Araisa of Havara, kindling a flame on Shabbos, as well as bishul. And therefore, the Chachamim Aserd prohibited Shehiyah, maintaining food on top of an open flame in certain circumstances. When they used to use fuel by lighting wood for their fuel, it would develop into coals. The outer part of the coal, shortly after being lit and on fire, would develop some ashes on its outer surface, whereby that would prevent air from entering, causing the coals to diminish in its strength. So naturally a person, when that happens, would stoke and stir the coals in order to then cause the ashes to fall off and strengthen the coals. Again, the Chacham were concerned that this is going to be happening on Shabbos, and therefore they prohibited Shehiyah. Our Mishnah teaches us when Shehiyah is permissible and when it is prohibited. Which circumstances are mutter and which circumstances are osir. Says the Mishnah, Kira shehisikua bekash ubegavavo noistin alea tavshil. A stove, a kira, they used to have their stoves made out of ceramic, and it was generally a rectangular stove which had enough space for two pots, and generally it was connected to the ground. They would cement it into the ground. And a person who uses kash and gavava, if you use straw and those small thin pieces of wood that still remain on the field after harvesting as their fuel for this flame, then they can put their pots and maintain it on that flame before Shabbos. Begefes uve'etim, however, if their fuel instead is the psoiles of olives and of sesame seeds, after they take out the oil from them and they use that as their fuel, then lo yitein ad sheyigroif or ad sheyitein es ha'efer, then they cannot maintain a pot of food on that stove before Shabbos until they either rake out the coals by taking out the coals from that stove, or they put a thin layer of afer, of ashes, on top of the coals, causing the coals to diminish in its heat. Both situations obviously cause hesech hadas, where they're no longer interested in then using those coals to cook afterwards. So therefore, there's not going to be a chashash of shema yechata. Maybe he will then stoke and stir the coals. Beis Shammai oimrim. Beis Shammai says, when is this permissible to maintain a pot on a fire? Chamin, that's when the pot is with hot water. Avolo tavshil, but tavshil, when it comes to a cooked item, that is not permissible even after goruf and kotum, even after raking out the coals and or putting afer, ashes, on top of the coals. If you don't have coals inside the stove, what's the concern? Because there's always going to be some burning embers inside of the stove, and therefore Beis Shammai is machmir that a person may still stir the coals. Now it's interesting, if we remember back in the first parak, and Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, the Gemara said that in regards to shvisas kelim, according to Beis Shammai, you cannot even allow your kelim to do malacha for you, and therefore he calls it an Isser D'Araisa. To which the Gemara in Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis explained that how does a person, let's say, light a ner before Shabbos? And also in our situation, how does a person put a pot on a kira, on a stove before Shabbos, according to Beis Shammai? To which Beis Shammai answered that he's mafkir. he makes that pot ownerless or that candle ownerless. Thereby, it's not his own kelim doing the malacha. So thereby, over here, Beis Shammai permits chamin, a pot that is heating up hot water, to be maintained on a flame. Ubeis Hillel oimrim. Ubeis Hillel says chamim v'tavshil. Beis Hillel is more mekil, and he says chamin and tavshil can be maintained on a flame where grufa, where you took out the coals, or ketuma, or you put ashes on the coals, that would be permissible even for a tavshil. Beis Shammai oimrim, a second machlokes, noitlin avaloi machzirin. You can take off the stove, the pot, but you cannot return the pot, because Beis Shammai was concerned that if you are unable to return the pot to the stove from where it was before, it would appear as if you're going to cook on Shabbos. Ubeis Hillel oimrim ach mazirin. Beis Hillel said even to return the pot on Shabbos would be mutter, because first of all, as long as it's fully cooked, second of all, you've done grufa or ketuma, and third of all, since you have your hand still on the pot, it doesn't appear that you're going to then cook initially, because you're returning it back from that situation where you already took it off and you're holding on to the pot. The poskim say an additional t'nai that you should also have intention, kavana, to be machzir the pot when you take it off the flame. Now, we explained the Mishnah just until now that this is talking about the Isser Dirabon of Shihiyah. However, the Gemara now will bring that there's another Tana who actually learns the Mishnah entirely different. That he holds Shihiyah does not require Gruf or Ketuma, not according to Beis Shammai and not according to Beis Hillel. What is our Mishnah discussing? It's wholly and entirely discussing the inyan of Chazara, of returning a pot to the stove. Says the Gemara, asking the following question: Iboiluhu hai lo yitain lo yachzirhu aval lishois mashin afal pi she'eino garu ve'eino katum. This that it says in the Mishnah lo yitain, does it really mean lo yachzir? You cannot return the pot, but you could initially keep the pot and maintain it if you put it on before Shabbos, even without grufa and ketuma, even without taking out the coals, or without putting ashes on top of the coals. Umani, and whose opinion would this be? Chananyahi. This would be Chananya. The Tanya, for it says in the following brayso, Chananya oimer, kol shehu kemaychal ben drosai, muter lishoisai al gabe kira, afal pi she'eino goru ve'eino kotum. Chananya is of the opinion, so long as the food is cooked a minimum amount of Maichel ben Drosai. Maichel ben Drosai is defined by the Mefarshim as either being a third cooked or a half cooked. And if a person has such food that is at least Maichel ben Drosai, then he's of the opinion that a person can leave that on the flame before Shabbos, even without Grufa and Ketuma. Oidilmo, or perhaps Lishois Tnan, or perhaps the Mishnah is talking about Shehiyah, as we discussed and explained in our Mishnah before. V'igaruf v'kotim in iloi loi. So long as you then took out the coals, you're goref, or you're koitem, or you put ashes on top of the coals, then it's okay, according to Beis Shammai, to maintain a pot of hot water, or according to Beis Hillel, even not only hot water, but also a tavshil. The kol sheken lahachzir. And so much so, how much more so to also then return it, that you would also require grufa and ketuma. So we have two different ways of explaining the Mishnah. Either according to Chananya, that's talking about chazara, because shihiyah is already self-understood even without requiring grufa and ketuma. You could put on an open flame before Shabbos, it's not a concern, so long as it's going to be cooked k'maichel ben drasoi. Or according to the Chachamim, that the Mishnah is speaking specifically about shehiyah, that requires grufa and ketuma, and kol sheken chazara requires grufa ketuma. Says the Gemara to try to prove, Toshma midiktoni trei bavi b'masnisin. from the fact that our Mishnah talks about two different situations in our Mishnah. Beis Shammai oimrim chamin aval lo tavshil, ubeis Hillel oimrim chamin v'tavshil. The fact that there's a machlokes in Beis Shammai and Hillel, if we're talking about chamin, hot water, alone, or we're also talking about tavshil. Beis Shammai oimrim noitlin aval lo machzirin, ubeis Hillel oimrim af machzirin. There's a separate machlokes that Beis Shammai says you can take off this stove, you can take off a pot from the stove, but you cannot return it, where Beis Hillel said you can even return it. So it'll be good to explain it. It'll go very well if you explain it. That's talking about shehiyah, that you can maintain a pot on the flame when you put it there before Shabbos. Then hachi kitani, and this is how the Mishnah is read. Kira shehi sikua bekash ubegavava, a stove that was ignited, that was fueled with kash and gavava. We explain that to be straw and those thin pieces of wood that are found on the sadeh, on the field after harvesting. They don't have themselves coals. So mashin aleh tavshil, you can put a tavshil on that open flame before Shabbos. Begefes uve'etzim. However, if you're going to fuel your fire with the psoiles of olives and sesame seeds after they already been taken out, the oil, ube'etzim, and wood, which causes a charcoal, lo yashe ache yigroif ache yitin efer, you cannot maintain that pot on the fire by putting it on before Shabbos unless you have done grufa or ketuma. Umahein mashin, and what is considered to be, you're allowed to be mashin, to maintain, if you do grufa and ketuma. Machlokes. Beis Shammai oimrim chamin avalot tavshil. Beis Shammai is the opinion hot water, but not tavshil, because tavshil requires a lot of cooking, and therefore a person might end up stirring and stoking the coals. Ubeis Hillel oimrim chamim v'tavshil. Once you did grufa and ketuma, Beis Hillel says we're not concerned that you're going to go back and then stoke the coals. You'll be reminded and be mesech das from those coals. V'kihechi de pligi, and when are they arguing? Beli hishois, that you can go ahead and maintain the flame. Pligi nami v'lahachzit. Just like v'kihechi de pligi b'lahashois, and just like they're arguing in maintaining a pot on the flame, pligi nami v'lahachzor, they're also then arguing on chazara, on returning the pot to the stove. Shebeis Shammai oimrim noitlin avoloi machzirin. Shebeis Shammai says that you can take off the stove that has that hot water from the pot that has that hot water from the stove, but you cannot return it to the stove. Ubeis Hillel oimrim af machzirin. And according to Beis Hillel, you can even return your pot that has either hot water or a tavshil back to the stove. But if you're going to suggest, like Chananya, that the Mishnah is Chananya, that it's indeed talking about chazara but not shehiyah, then hochiktani, this is what you'd have to teach. Kira shehi sikua bekashu begavava machzirin ale tavshil. The kira, the stove that you are igniting with kash and gavava, you can machzir the tavshil, even tavshil, because here we're talking about a kash and gava where it's ignited with something that's not going to produce a coal. So even Beis Shammai is not concerned about that. However, if you're going to fuel it with something that's going to produce a coal, then you have to then rake out the coals or put ashes. Umahein machzirin, and what can be returned? Beis Shammai oimrim chamin, only hot water. Avalot tavshil, but not a tavshil, not a cooked dish. Ubeis Hillel oimrim chamin v'tavshil. Beis Hillel says both chamin and tavshil. That would be sufficient if the Mishnah stopped right here. However, the Mishnah goes on and adds Beis Shammai oimrim noitlin avaloi machzirin. Ubeis Hillel oimrim af machzirin. Beis Shammai says you can take off the tavshil, but you cannot return it. Ubeis Hillel says you can even return it. Hasulamali, asked the Gemara, according to this explanation that we're talking about chazara in the Mishnah, this latter phrase is superfluous. Answers the Gemara, La'olam emoloch lahachzir tnan. Really, I'll tell you that the Mishnah is talking about lahachzir, like the way Rabbi Chananya does explain. V'chesure mechsera, and the text of the Mishnah is missing words. V'hachi kitani, and this is how you have to teach the Mishnah. Kira shehisikua bekash ubegavava machzirin aleh tafshil. That you can even return tafshil again because it doesn't have a fuel that's going to produce coals. There won't be a chashash of shema yechate. Begefes uve'etzim. However, if it's fueled with gefes or eitzim that does produce a charcoal, then lo yachzir ad sheyigroif or ad sheyitin es ha'efer. Then you cannot return it until you did goref or kotum. Now they put in the following words: avalish hois mashin. But to maintain a pot on the fire from before Shabbos, one can do so. Beishamai afal pi she'eino gor ve'eino kotum umahein mashin. And what can you be mashin even without grufa and ketuma? Now the Mishnah continues. Beishamai oimim chamin avoloi tavshil ubeis hillel oimim chamin v'tavshil. Now they put in further words. V'hach chazora da amri loch. And this chazora that they said to you, lav divrei hakolki. You should know it's not according to everybody. Ele machloikis is based on a machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what you can return. Beis Shammai uBeis Hillel, Beis Shammai oimim noitlin v'loi machzirin. Beis Shammai says you can take off the tavshil from the flame, but you cannot return it. Ubeis Hillel oimim af machzirin. You can even take a tavshil and return it to its stove.